I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times. Welcome to the New York Times Close Up. We're headed into the home stretch of this midterm election cycle. The email requests for funds and support flooding our inboxes. The commercials getting more and more pointed. Professor Douglas Muzzio of the Marx School of Public and International Affairs at CUNY's Baruch College will help guide us through the thickets. My Times colleagues discuss some of the issues that have been concerning them on the backstory, and I'll offer some additional thoughts on Coda. But first, Doug Muzzio, professor of political science at CUNY's Baruch College and a host of his program on CUNY TV, will help us figure out what is going on this election cycle.
You have high hopes, Sam.
I do have high hopes, and that's why you're here. Doug, what do your students ask about this? Are they totally turned off? Do they say, what's going on? Is there anything we can do? Or are they fired up and say, we've got to do something?
They're fired up. They've got to do something. Many of them are involved in politics, many for the first time. I would say in my class of 22, there are 20 involved students. They are informed and they are interested and engaged, and they're going to vote, and they're going out and doing political work.
What does it mean to be involved in New York? Does it matter? Or are they going to other states and getting involved where the vote is more pivotal?
Well, they're primarily working in New York State. I mean, they work, they
although there are places, of course, in the suburbs of upstate where the pivotal race.
Where I live upstate is the 19th Congressional District, and it's John Faso versus Antonio Delgado, and it's close. It's close. So, I mean, every little bit, they understand that every little bit helps.
And what's your forecast? I mean, we're now about 10 days away. Do you have any gut feeling as to which way Congress is going to go?
Yeah, I have a gut feeling. I don't know. My gut's been wrong too often, particularly in 2016. I think the Democrats are going to take the House, and I think that they probably will not take the Senate, and in fact may lose seats in the Senate.
Really?
So we're going to have what the founders envisioned, and we're going to have deadlock rather than one-party rule.
So is that better, worse, or the same?
It's much better. It depends on your perspective. Being a Democrat, I would prefer that it's deadlock rather than having all levers of power in the hands of the Republican Party.
And what would a Democratic House do, or what can it do?
Well, it initiates money bills, which is a big thing. It's got the power of oversight, which the current Republican House members haven't done. I would see a plethora of investigations of the White House, and I would see a stymieing of most pieces of legislation coming out of the White House and the Senate.
And you'd have our own Jerry Nadler, presumably, as head of the Judiciary Committee. What about the state Senate?
Again, I mean, the state Senate is wide open. One or two votes could make a difference. I really don't know, but my gut tells me that the Democrats are going to take it, but I don't know.
So if that happens, does that call Governor Cuomo's bluff? All this time he's been blaming everything that goes wrong on the Republican state Senate. Now, what does he do?
Well, now he's in trouble. I mean, he faces a assembly that is more liberal than he is and wants to move in directions that he doesn't want to move in. And then, similarly, the state Senate under Democratic rule is he's going to run into problems. I mean, he, if not created, he fostered the IDC and alliance with the Republicans, and a more conservative break on the assembly.
When students say to you, my God, this must be awful, this is the worst time ever, do you say to them, wait a minute, look at the late teens, the 1920s, look at the 1950s, it really was worse then? Or is it
I don't
worse
know.
now?
I have a feeling that this is potentially the worst since the Civil War. And I don't have as long a personal history.
You don't go back that far.
No, I don't go back to 1919 bombings, but the war in Vietnam was a cataclysmic break, and it has reverberations to today. I honestly don't think that Vietnam and Watergate were as parlous and dangerous as the current situation. I see this as maybe, you know what? It's worse than the bombings in the teens and 20s, because you had a more unified political culture. Now you have two armed camps that don't see any resolution. And to me, I hope it's not tantamount to something worse. I mean, a real breakdown. I mean, violence, secession movements, etc. I mean, we're in an extreme time.
You really think it's that bad?
I might be over dramatizing it, but I don't think so. I think these are really, really dangerous times.
I'm not sure it will get that bad, but one of the signs that really I find disturbing is that people simply don't listen to each other anymore.
No.
That you can barely have a conversation, much less a debate. And a lot of that is a problem on college campuses as well. I'm not sure how much it is affected on CUNY, but when you can invite certain speakers, when speakers are interrupted, when you have, what is now called microaggression, where you have to issue warnings about saying certain things. Right. I mean, when I went to college, when I went to school, we were offended by certain speech. We didn't like to be. But are we bending over backwards too much now? I mean, do you have a right to speech, a right to listen, and a right not to listen?
Yeah, but
where
really,
do you draw the line?
Yeah, well, I really believe that you don't have the right to interfere with legitimate speech. And most speech on college campus is what I would consider legitimate speech. It's in the main thoughtful, it's in the main challengeable, and we are getting to a point where the crowd is influencing our attitudes towards speech. And I think that's dangerous.
So what do you do about it? I mean, if you object to a speaker, you stand up and walk out, or some form of protest.
Right.
But don't you let them speak?
I do, and I think that universities should be rigorous in fostering and protecting the right of speech, an unlimited right of speech. I mean, obviously with certain exceptions, but the times are dangerous in that respect as well, that we're cutting off, other opinions, and we're not listening to people, and we're siloing our news sources, and we see our opposites as enemies rather than opponents. It's WWF. It's World Federation. Mm-hmm. It's a kill sport.
The president, for a couple of hours, called for unity, and then he attacked the media again.
I mean,
now, is this all calculated so that people think there is chaos in the White House, and then you read Michael Lewis's book and see that what's really going on is that while people think, oh, there's incompetence and nobody's running the government, but in fact, the government is really being dismantled by people who want to destroy the bureaucracy and regulation.
Oh, of course. I mean, he appointed cabinet secretaries whose avowed purpose was to destroy the agencies.
And that is happening.
No, it is happening, and they are very successful in getting judges, changing EPA regulations. The hidden activities of government are going their way. But at the top level, at the presidential level, we have, in my mind, an irrational, ignorant person.
But you're sure that the chaos, the buffoonery, whatever you want to call it, isn't studied, isn't a diversionary tactic?
You know, I firmly believe that what you see is what you get. You see a fool and you got a fool.
Well, what does it say about the rest of us, or almost the majority of us, that what we see is what we got because he got elected?
Well, I mean, you can't blame it on him. You'll blame it on his supporters, which appear to be a angry, I'd hate to say it, ignorant mass. I mean, if you, after all this time and all the heinous things that he's done, still continue to support him, and if you see those rallies, there's something, can I use the word evil? There's something malignant about it, and it is dangerous. There's a short distance between lock her up and kill her. And the bombings, we don't know the provenance of the bombings and who did it, but it would appear to be a Trump supporter. I mean, every one of the bombs went to people that Trump has explicitly condemned and condemned many times.
And doesn't part of the blame lie on the people who were running against Trump? Because they obviously didn't do a good enough job persuading people.
Oh, sure. I mean, the Republican field in 2016 was
and
lousy.
the Democratic.
And the Democratic candidate was a failure.
Is it going to be any better in 2020?
It's got to be. It's got to be. I think that the Democratic candidate will not have the baggage going in that Hillary Clinton had, and they won't make the same tactical and strategic errors they made the last time.
Last question. What about Mike Bloomberg?
No way. Forget about it. He's anathema to the Republicans, and he's not particularly a champion of the progressive left. So where does that get you, both in the primary and in the general election? I think that in many ways, Mike Bloomberg is an ideal candidate in terms of ideas, temperament.
Or an ideal president.
An ideal president. But I don't think he can win, and I think he realizes it, and I don't think he's going to run.
Thanks to Doug Muzzio for joining us, and my Times colleagues confer in a moment. Welcome back. It's been a volatile week. Explosives found in the mailboxes of prominent Democrats. The debate between Governor Cuomo and his Republican challenger, Mark Molinaro, generated a lot of heat, not much light. Joining me to discuss these stories and more, my Times colleagues, contributing writer Eleanor Randolph and Metro reporters Tyler Pager and Jeffrey C. Mays. Tyler, you looked at the debate between the gubernatorial candidates and tried to figure out who was telling more of the truth and who was not. So who was?
Well, we saw on both sides that there was some, as we called it, some revisionist history from both candidates. And
I like that phrase.
It was across the board, starting as early, right at the beginning when Cuomo was pressed on the state budget, whether he was passing it on time, and then also how much he was raising spending. He said that he hadn't gone above 2%, and that was shown not to be true. And also that he said he passed it on time 7 times in a row. And we also found that that was not true, as the 2017 budget was passed at least 6 days late. So there was that. There were some lighter moments where we raised questions about whether it was not true, about his favorite song, perhaps saying the wrong one. But then also Molinaro on his relationship with Trump. Cuomo really, throughout the debate, tried to tie him to Donald Trump and the far-right Republican Party. And Molinaro dodged those questions at one point, saying, let's get out of this conversation. But that doesn't fully add up with his record in terms of supporting Donald Donald Trump. In 2015, we found tweets where he appeared with Donald Trump's relatives using the hashtag Make America Great Again. So both candidates definitely fudged a little bit on some of their statements.
It looked like Cuomo's fudging were sort of technicalities. I mean, he passed most of the budgets on time except one. One budget was a little bit more overspending than the others.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that they were major factual inaccuracies, but maybe on the subway people would challenge him. He boasted that he...
Yeah, that seemed like the biggie.
Yeah, he said at one point that no one's had better stewardship or than him over the subway, and I think a lot of
Very
New Yorkers would disagree with that. The New York Times did a big investigation showing that he diverted funds from the subway, and he's often blamed Mayor de Blasio for the subway deterioration, whereas we know that the governor controls the subway.
Eleanor,
to be fair,
go ahead.
I was going to say, to be fair, Molinaro the next day or soon after that debate said that the reason he did not vote for Trump, that he put in another Republican name, I think it was Chris Gibson, wasn't it? But anyway, the reason he didn't vote for Trump is that he has a disabled daughter, and that when Trump made fun of our reporter, Serge Kowalewski, that just did it for him, and then he did not vote for Trump. I mean, you can see that he's trying to walk that line to keep the Trump voters on his team, but he did say he didn't vote for him.
Let me ask you something. The governor says he's spending money on the subways. He built the Tappan Zee Bridge. He's renovating LaGuardia Airport, Kennedy Airport. It seems to me that he's spending the same billions of dollars over and over again. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And what he's doing with the MTA, you sort of see it. I mean, he's borrowed the. What he does is he says, well, you're not going to need that money for another year or 2 years, so I'm going to take it back. And the question is whether or not the MTA ever actually gets it back. I mean, I think the good thing is that Cuomo is starting to admit that he controls the MTA. We've gone back and forth about Cuomo and the mayor. Who runs the place? Cuomo runs it.
Jeffrey, it may be premature. The election is 10 days away, but we're all assuming that Letitia James will be elected Attorney General. At least candidates running for her office of public advocate assume that. How does that race look like it's shaping up?
This looks like it's going to be a free-for-all, grand royale battle. There are a dozen or more people, politicians, elected officials, people who are term limited from their council seats, advocates. Everyone is going to throw their name into this race, assuming that Tish James wins the Attorney General race. There are so many people, at least 6 or 7 people on the council. This week, Jumaane Williams, who ran for lieutenant governor and had a very strong showing, getting over 400,000 votes in the city, announced that he was going to run. But people are not intimidated. Michael Blake in the Bronx said, this is going to be a different race. This is going to be a special election in the middle of the winter, and he believes he has a chance, as does more than a dozen other people.
So how do you handicap a race like that? It's nonpartisan, not by party?
Yeah, it's going to be nonpartisan. If Tish wins and vacates the seat, Mayor de Blasio will call a special election. That election will be held sometime in the winter, probably in February or so. People will then be able to collect petitions, get on the ballot. And there are some big names. A former City Council Speaker, Melissa Mark Viverito, and Christine Quinn are rumored to be interested in this position as well. So it's all going to come down to a strong ground game, who can get out the vote in this election that people aren't going to necessarily be paying attention to.
And let me ask a sort of naive question, if I may. Why does anybody want the job?
Well, the job has few stated responsibilities. You preside over the city council, you can introduce legislation. The real bonus of this job is that it's a straight path to mayor of New York City,
Right.
As Mayor Bill de Blasio has done, and others have tried to use it as a launching pad to mayor. So you have lots of people thinking about their political futures and trying to get this job.
It could be good exposure if used properly.
Absolutely. Citywide exposure, you get experience running in a citywide race, you get citywide name recognition, you can make a lot of noise with this position if you really want to.
As we said, the state election's coming up in 10 days. Any surprises likely, particularly statewide offices or congressional races, which are a lot more crucial?
Oh, Sam. I mean, after 2016, dare we predict, who's going to do what? I mean, I've been looking at the state Senate races, and it does look as though the Democrats have enough they only need one seat to actually gain the majority in the state Senate, and if they do that, there are lots of races that is a possibility, especially in Long Island, and of course Marty Golden's seat in Brooklyn. So those are interesting, and we were talking about Marty Golden and all his antics over the last few years. He's been there 16 years, so it may be time for somebody else to take the job.
And Tyler, you had a terrific story recently explaining that we don't really elect judges even though we claim to, right?
Yeah, so I looked at even a lower rung of democracy in the city with county committees, which are partisan. So I was looking at Democratic county committees, and this was in Brooklyn, the Kings County Democratic Committee meeting, where this had just come off of the primary elections where they vote for these members, and there's like 5,000 seats available. They're not all filled because you're just kind of representing your block. And when they got to this meeting, a lot of these progressive reformers were excited about having a voice in the democratic process of picking judicial appointments and filling special election seats in terms of picking the Democratic nominee. But when they got there, they found that their vote really didn't matter because the party boss, Frank Seddio, corralled enough proxy votes to overrule the more than 500 people in the room. So he put up his judicial nominees, and despite the raucous environment booing, it didn't matter because as soon as Seddio voted and those 500 proxies that he had or his allies had, he got what he wanted. So it wasn't necessarily democracy in action in the sense that one person held more power than everyone in the room.
He could teach a lesson or two to Joe Crowley in Queens, I guess. Thanks to my Times colleagues, Eleanor Randolph, Tyler Pager, and Jeffrey Mays for joining me, and I'll have some additional thoughts next on Coda. Debates by themselves rarely determine the result of an election, but this week's belated and only face-to-face confrontation between Andrew Cuomo and Mark Molinaro could still prove consequential on Election Day. If anything, it might discourage voter turnout. Molinaro, the Republican challenger, held his own. He made no serious mistakes. In his only opportunity to question the governor, though, he inflicted a bruise or two, but nothing like the knockout punch that a poorly financed underdog like him desperately needed. Cuomo, seeking a third term, was customarily cocky and combative. He again accused Molinaro of guilt by association with President Trump as a fellow Republican. Molinaro has said he didn't vote for Trump in 2016, though, and Cuomo didn't mention that Trump has contributed to his own past campaigns. At one point, Cuomo branded Molinaro a lifetime politician. If Cuomo meant that as a slur, it's pretty hollow coming from someone who managed his father's campaigns and who has spent half his adult life in appointive or elective government posts. The governor did not elaborate on his agenda for legalizing marijuana possession, protecting women's rights to abortion, or precisely how he will deliver further on his overstated claim that, as he put it, you have never seen a governor take more responsibility for the subways than I have. He didn't say, nor was he asked, how he seems to be magically spending the same billions of dollars for new airports, bridges, subways, and other public works over and over again. Molinaro offered a few hints of a platform for his first term. Cuomo mostly recited his record, leaving a vision for the future behind him. If the governor had a campaign slogan, it might be a variation on "You Carries" in 1974. Before they tell you what they want to do, make them show you what they've done. Which pretty much means that when you vote on November 6th, you're going to have to decide largely on whether you're satisfied with what he's achieved as governor so far. The governor would like the election to be viewed as a referendum on President Trump, but it's really about Andrew Cuomo, about what, admittedly, while stymied by a Republican-controlled Senate, he's promised and delivered, and what he's failed to accomplish so far. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.